Nina Farnia is a legal historian and scholar of critical race theory. Her scholarship examines the role of modern US imperialism in shaping domestic areas of law, with a particular focus on the rise of autocratic legalism. Her publications explore a variety of related subjects, including the role of US foreign affairs in shaping modern jurisdiction, the formation of the national security state, and the evolution of freedom of speech and religion. She is currently working on a book entitled Imperialism and the Making of U.S. Law. Farnia has published in a wide range of academic journals and popular media outlets, including the Stanford Law Review, UCLA Women's Law Journal, Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, Geopolitical Economy Report, and the San Francisco Chronicle, among others. She currently serves as the secretary of the American Association of Law Schools section on Law the Humanities, and is the co-chair of the International People's Tribunal on US Imperialism, Sanctions, Blockades, and Economic Coercive Measures. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina. I will give you a heads up, I guess, with about 2 to 3 minutes left, or yeah, okay. I'll give you a heads up at that point.
Thank you all very much. And a special thanks to Radhika and Bikram and Brendan for organizing this and inviting us and bringing us all together. This is a great turnout, I think. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to the discussion later. So as Bikram said, I'm a legal scholar. I'm a historian, but also I'm a law professor. And so I spend my days with law students and lawyers. And so I'll be entering the discussion in a bit from a different vantage point, I think, than we normally enter these conversations. As many of you probably know, a debate is raging right now among the intellectual class in the United States about whether the US is fascistic. Liberals, though they call themselves left, I like to call them the fake left, the faux left, like Daniel Besner in an article in the New Republic, historian Bruce Kuckler, and political theorist Corey Robin, are arguing that the conditions that presupposed European fascism don't apply to the United States now. These conditions include the presence of a strong and organized left on the verge of seizing power, and a broad experience of total war. Alternatively, intellectuals such as Angela Davis, Gerald Horne, and many others have long argued that the US has already arrived to fascism. They marshal the white supremacist, settler colonial, and imperial history of the US to make the overall claim. I don't think I need to tell you that the debate is deeply racialized. It's largely white scholars who are reluctant to call the US fascistic, even as they recognize the violence that created this nation and that continues to wreak havoc upon the lives of most of us. While Black scholars and other non-whites, what I like to call the people of the global majority, embrace the term as an accurate descriptor of the US and its future. Part of why Besner and the rest get it wrong is that they misidentify the preconditions of European fascism, basing it in the response to communism and completely disregarding the role of race and even a little bit of capital. Bulgarian communist Georgy Dimitrov identified a different set of preconditions to fascism, conditions which by and large apply quite neatly to the contemporary United States. Number one, economic conditions. An economic crisis that leads to exceptional predation upon the working class. In the US context, this predation is racially stratified. Number two, political conditions. A disorganized working class that is easily divided by social democrats who practice class collaboration with the elite. Notably, the Social Democrats are the most aggressive force undermining a broad, united front against fascism. This is very actively happening in the United States right now. In fact, I think the Democratic Socialists of America has its national conference next weekend, and a group of Palestinian organizations came out with a very powerful statement telling the DSA, take a position on Zionism. So this is where the DSA is right now, as bombs continue to fall on the Palestinians. The second condition under political conditions is a weak elite that is unable to manage and neutralize working people through elections and so-called democracy. While this condition has not fully realized itself, the January 6th coup attempt and the prosecution of a recent president are indications that the electoral system is no longer as effective as it once was at managing and neutralizing working people. This is in part due to ongoing white supremacy and the racialized divisions in the working class. And finally, international conditions. 3, the subjugation of other nations in order to resolve the problem of markets. An excellent example of this is the increasing reliance of the global north on sanctions, economic coercive measures, which are designed to remove productive global south economies from the market and maintain US and European market dominance. This is, of course, now, sanctions have also now begun to create a crisis for the US and Europe, but we can talk about that later because of the Russian sanctions and the rise of BRICS. Another point is the intensification of colonial repression, increasing militarism, 1,000 US military bases, drone strikes, hybrid warfare, etc., and the repartitioning of the world anew by means of war. What we're witnessing in Ukraine, what happened with Iraq, Syria, and Vietnam, what may happen, hopefully not, with Taiwan. These are the preconditions of fascism. Now, what is fascism? In 1933, the Communist International defined fascism as the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, understood to mean racist, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. Within a space like this, there may be principal disagreement about whether the US is proto-fascist or by virtue of its racial slavery, genocide, and colonialism, already fascist. I'm not going to answer that question. But what I will say is that fascist tendencies are always present, particularly in capitalist societies. In fact, there's no politically pure form of government that is void of either freedom, consent, or coercion. Every government and state system reflects all of these characteristics, even the US and even the governments that people like to call autocratic or authoritarian. What is key is that fascism looks different depending on the political context in which it evolves. Now I'm going to get to autocratic legalism and specifically the role of the law. I want to say a couple of things about the law. First, before I get to the theory, first, the law is not always a bourgeois liberal force. It can be whatever society makes of it. And virtually every society, not virtually, every society in the world, whether Islamic, communist, socialist, Republican, democratic, authoritarian, has a legal system. These are the rules by which we relate to one another. They can be marshaled in a fascistic way. They can be marshaled in an equitable way. Every society has law. The other thing I want to talk about is the relationship between liberals and fascists. It's not a purely instrumental relationship. Liberals don't instrumentalize fascism to their ends. They actually are co-constitutive forces. They're co-creators. And that's why looking at the role of the law is critical in understanding the development and manifestation of fascism. According to Dimitrov, before the establishment of a fascist dictatorship, bourgeois governments usually pass through a number of preliminary stages and adopt a number of reactionary measures which directly facilitate the accession to power of fascism. This is precisely what many legal scholars are now calling autocratic legalism, what I define as the fascist capture of the state through the law. In the US case, the reactionary measures are designed to facilitate the accession to power of fascism by completely eliminating any opposition to it. There are a series of ways in which this is occurring, largely, though not exclusively, through the far-right Supreme Court as we speak. I'll start by describing cases that implicate what we call access to justice, the ability to file lawsuits and vindicate one's rights in court. I'll try to go through the cases quickly. So in a 2004 case, Chrysler versus Baumann, plaintiffs in Argentina filed suit against Mercedes-Benz in California federal court, alleging that Mercedes collaborated with the Argentine dictatorship to kidnap, detain, torture, and kill plaintiffs from 1976 to 1983 in what people often call Argentina's dirty war. The case reached the Supreme Court in 2014. The liberal justices on the court found that even though Mercedes-Benz operates in the US and has extensive business contacts with the US, it cannot be sued in US courts. There was no jurisdiction. And as we know, international courts have no enforcement mechanism. They're incredibly weak. So basically, Mercedes-Benz was immune. In a 2009 case, this is a very famous and very significant case, Ashcroft versus Iqbal, a citizen of Pakistan who was a cable company employee in New York, was arrested during the post 9/11 roundups and filed suit against the US government, challenging the racial profiling and harsh conditions of confinement he was subject to as a result of his race, religion, and national origin. Prior to this case, in order to file a lawsuit, you only needed very basic information, very basic factual allegations. This is because at the beginning of a lawsuit, you don't have evidence to prove your allegations. You get that evidence through a process that in the law is called discovery. Iqbal raised the standard to plausibility, meaning that when you file a lawsuit, all the allegations you make must be plausible. You must have basically some form of evidence. This makes it much harder to actually file lawsuits in the US, not just in the context of terrorism, but across the law. Post-Iqbal, the success of plaintiffs filing suits dropped down by 30% across different areas of the law. And Iqbal basically had the consequence of rendering racial profiling lawful. And local governments have relied on Iqbal to justify racial profiling. And of course, I don't think I'm going to mention, but I don't think I need to talk about what has happened with regard to abortion rights and affirmative action. For whatever reason, those two issues in particular are not on the radar of the so-called leftists who argue that the US is not fascistic. But both cases are designed to do exactly what the 1933 International suggested fascism does, suppress its opposition. Such suppression need not be through tasers and batons and jail cells. I'll start with talking about abortion rights. One of the reasons why women are dominating the workforce in higher education today is because our generations had the unequivocal right to choose. We weren't forced to stay home with children that resulted from unintended pregnancies, best case scenario, or rape or incest, which are both much more common than we think. But that will now change. Gerald Horne calls the attack on reproductive rights and on trans people in the US the manifestations of the current crisis of masculinity, a crisis driven by capitalism, which has resulted from the ascendance and dominance of women in the workforce and in education. Affirmative action has now been decimated by the US Supreme Court. The court found that it's unlawful, except, then does anybody know what the exception is to this? I mean, I know like Mateo and my friends know, but the exception is military academies. So schools of higher education can no longer use affirmative action in order to admit historically excluded groups like Black, Latinx, and Indigenous peoples. But military academies can, elite military academies especially. What this suggests, and what Justice Jackson put in her dissent, is that these young people are fit to die in US wars, but not fit to learn. And Cheryl Harris, a well-known critical race theorist many years ago, called the ongoing attacks on affirmative action a war on Black education, which began as soon as Africans landed on these shores, and it continues to this day. Denial of education is a key feature of the underdevelopment and depoliticization of a society. And the racial purges and blacklists that we're now seeing of Black intellectuals are part of a broader plan, not just to suppress and repress, but also to neutralize the masses, what I call the global majority, and also working people. So to conclude, going back to Bikram and Césaire, in 1950, Césaire wrote Discourse on Colonialism. He was concerned with the, quote, boomerang effect of colonialism upon Europe. He said, the Gestapos are busy, the prisons fill up, the torturers standing around the racks invent, refine, and discuss. People are surprised and they become indignant. The Holocaust, he said, was European colonialism turned inward. The stakes are quite high, not merely because some of us live in the United States and Europe, or because our children live here, but also because the US has an outsized and unfortunately outsized role in the world. And fascism here will reverberate in different ways globally, not just fueling social crises as it does now, but also planetary crises that will make our planet unlivable for future generations. So this naming game that the intellectuals I mentioned at the beginning of my talk are playing in their debates about whether or not to call the US fascist, in my opinion, is ridiculous. We can't and should not dupe ourselves into thinking that this is somehow less bad or less serious than what came before. If we do that, then what's to come will likely be far worse than anything we could ever have imagined. And with the climate crisis and the extraordinary heat that our peoples throughout the world are experiencing, that alone is proof enough. Thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.